No one cares anymore, she snapped, right before a battle-scarred single dad stepped out of the crowd, faced the whole town, and proved that one act of courage can still shake the world. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Turner's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the oil-stained concrete floor. Jack Turner wiped his forehead with the back of his weathered hand, leaving a dark smudge of grease above his eyebrow. The familiar scent of motor oil and rubber filled the cramped space, mixing with the metallic tang of tools and the faint aroma of coffee from his thermos on the workbench. He bent over the engine of Mrs. Peterson's old Buick, its pale blue paint faded and chipped from years of faithful service. The engine bay was cramped, forcing him to work at an awkward angle as he adjusted the carburetor. His calloused fingers moved with practiced precision, each motion deliberate and sure. This was his sanctuary, a place where broken things could be fixed, where problems had solutions, where the chaos in his mind could quiet to a manageable hum. In the corner of the shop, nestled between a stack of tire rims and an old filing cabinet, Lily sat at the small wooden desk they'd rescued from a garage sale and painted bright yellow together. Her pencil moved steadily across her math homework, the soft scratching sound barely audible over the distant hum of traffic outside. Her dark hair, inherited from Sarah, was pulled back in a neat ponytail secured with a blue ribbon that matched her school uniform. When the sunlight caught the silky strands just right, the resemblance to her mother was so striking, it made Jack's chest ache with a familiar hollow pain. "Did you hear about Ruth Ann's daughter?" Mrs. Peterson's voice carried across the shop, sharp and knowing, as she chatted with Mrs. Holloway, who'd stopped by to pick up her husband's truck. Getting divorced after only 8 months of marriage. Such a shame, really. All that money spent on the wedding. And for what? Mrs. Holloway clucked her tongue sympathetically. Times sure have changed from when we were young. Nobody seems to stick together anymore through the hard times. Everything's disposable these days, relationships, promises, vows. Mark my words, Mrs. Peterson continued, warming to her subject. That girl never learned the value of commitment. Her mother spoiled her rotten, never taught her that marriage takes work. Jack kept his eyes fixed on the engine, his jaw tightening as he listened to their chatter. The wrench in his hand felt heavier somehow, and the familiar voices of the two women began to fade, replaced by something else entirely. The echo of explosions rumbled in his ears, distant at first, then growing closer. The acrid smell of smoke and burning fuel seemed to overpower the motor oil. The wrench in his hand suddenly felt like the cold metal of his rifle, and for a terrifying moment, he wasn't in his quiet shop in Willow Creek anymore. He was back in the suffocating heat of the desert, sand stinging his face, the deafening roar of helicopters overhead, the chaos of voices shouting orders, the rattle of gunfire, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. His breathing grew shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs as the memories threatened to pull him under completely. "Daddy?" Lily's voice cut through the darkness like a lifeline, gentle but insistent. "Can you check my division problems?" "I think I got 'em right, but I want to make sure." Jack blinked hard, his vision slowly clearing as the shop came back into focus. The wrench was just a wrench again, the voices just neighborhood gossip. He took a deep, shaky breath, forcing his hands to steady. "Sure, sweetheart," he managed, his voice only slightly hoarse. "Just let me finish tightening this last bolt." The morning wore on, in its familiar rhythm, customers coming and going with their automotive troubles. Jack worked steadily, losing himself in the comforting patterns of diagnosis and repair. There was something almost meditative about the work, the logical progression of identifying problems, ordering parts, applying solutions. Here, in this small corner of the world, things made sense. Broken meant fixable. Worn meant replaceable. But every now and then, when his guard was down, unbidden memories would surface like oil rising to the top of water. Sarah in her hospital bed, her face pale but still beautiful, her voice weak but determined as she told him to be strong for their daughter. The relentless beeping of the machines that had become the soundtrack to their final weeks together. The way her hand had felt so small and cold in his. And then, that terrible, devastating silence. when the machines finally stopped. "Mr. Turner?" A gravelly voice interrupted his thoughts. Bob Martinez, who owned the hardware store down the street, stood beside his pickup truck, keys jingling in his weathered hands. "How much longer on my truck? Got a delivery to make this afternoon." "About an hour," Jack replied, grateful for the distraction that pulled him back to the present. "Just need to finish the wheel alignment and check the tire pressure. She'll run smooth as silk when I'm done with her." Bob nodded approvingly. "You do good work, Jack. Always have. This old girl's been running better since you started working on her than she did when she was new." Around noon, when the sun was high and the shop had grown warm, despite the open bay doors, Lily approached with a brown paper bag in her small hands. She'd carefully packed a sandwich, cutting it diagonally, just the way she'd watched her mother do countless times. "Mom's recipe," she announced proudly, her chin lifted with the satisfaction of a job well done. "I remembered the extra pickle slice and everything." Jack's throat tightened as he accepted the sandwich, recognizing Sarah's careful touch in every detail: the bread sliced evenly, the mustard spread just to the edges, the pickle positioned perfectly so it wouldn't make the bread soggy. "Thanks, baby girl," he managed, his voice thick with emotion he tried to hide. "Looks perfect." Lily beamed at the praise, settling beside him on an overturned crate to eat her own smaller sandwich. They sat in comfortable silence, the sounds of the street filtering in through the open doors, children playing, dogs barking, the distant rumble of the afternoon freight train that passed through town like clockwork. The afternoon passed in a steady blur of oil changes and brake repairs, the kind of routine work that paid the bills and kept food on their table. When Mr. Chen brought in his sedan with a rattling exhaust pipe, Jack welcomed the challenge of a more complex repair. When the last customer finally left as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jack locked up the shop with the same careful ritual he performed every day, checking each door twice, switching off each light individually. They climbed into his old pickup truck, its red paint faded to a dusty rose and its bench seat worn smooth by years of use. The engine turned over with a reliable rumble, ironic, since Jack kept every other vehicle in town running perfectly while his own truck held together through prayer and stubbornness. Their house wasn't much to look at from the outside, a modest two-bedroom ranch with aluminum siding that had seen better decades, but Sarah's loving touch was still everywhere for those who knew how to look. The flower boxes she'd installed beneath the front windows still bloomed with the perennials she'd carefully selected for their hardiness. The wind chimes she'd hung from the porch ceiling still sang their gentle melody with each passing breeze. The welcome mat she'd picked out during their first spring in the house, with its cheerful sunflower pattern, still lay positioned precisely where she'd placed it, though the colors had faded from countless seasons of sun and rain. Inside, the house wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. Jack heated up the tuna casserole that Mrs. Davidson from church had brought over earlier in the week, one of many meals that appeared regularly on their doorstep, the congregation's quiet way of caring for the widower and his daughter. While the casserole warmed in the oven, Lily carefully set the small dining table with their everyday dishes, arranging the napkins just so and filling their glasses with cold milk. Before eating, they joined hands across the narrow table, just as they always had when Sarah was alive, to complete their circle. The ritual felt both comforting and heartbreaking, a reminder of what they'd lost and what they still held dear. "Dear Lord," Jack began, his voice soft but steady, carrying the weight of a man who'd seen too much but still chose to believe. "Thank you for this food and for keeping us safe today. Thank you for the work that provides for us and for the people who care about us." He paused, struggling with the words he always added, the ones that never got easier to say. "And please watch over Sarah for us. Help us honor her memory by living with the same kindness she showed everyone. Amen." "Amen," Lily echoed solemnly, squeezing his calloused hand with her small, soft one before letting go. They ate quietly for a while, the only sounds the gentle scraping of forks against plates and the distant murmur of their neighbor's television through the thin walls. Jack noticed Lily glancing at him several times, her dark eyes thoughtful, clearly working up the courage to say something important. "Daddy?" she finally ventured, her voice carrying that particular tone children use when they're about to ask for something they're not sure they'll get. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Don't forget about tomorrow," she said carefully, watching his face for any sign of resistance. "Jax." Fork paused halfway to his mouth, a piece of casserole balanced precariously on the tines. "Tomorrow? The Veteran Shelter Cleanup Day," Lily continued, her words coming faster now. "You promised we'd go help, remember, Mrs.? Wilson called last week and asked if we could volunteer." The fork completed its journey to Jack's mouth, but he barely tasted the food as he chewed slowly, buying time. He had promised, hadn't he? The thought of being around other veterans, of possibly having to talk about his own experiences or listen to theirs, made his stomach clench with familiar anxiety. The shelter was full of men who'd seen what he'd seen, who carried their own invisible wounds. But Lily's eyes were bright with hope, and he could almost hear Sarah's voice, as clear as if she were sitting right beside them. "Don't shut yourself away, Jack. They need you, and you need them." "Right," he said slowly, setting down his fork. "The cleanup day, Mrs. Wilson said they really need strong guys to help move furniture around," Lily continued eagerly, sensing she was winning the battle. "And I can help sort through all the donations they've been getting. There's supposed to be boxes and boxes of clothes and books and stuff. Please, Daddy? I really want to help people like you helped people." Looking at her earnest face, framed by the same dark hair Sarah had possessed, Jack found he couldn't say no. The idea still made him nervous, but disappointing his daughter seemed worse than facing his own discomfort. "Okay, sweetheart," he said finally. "We'll go." Lily's face lit up with pure joy, the kind of unguarded happiness that reminded him why he kept fighting through each difficult day. After dinner and the careful ritual of washing and drying the dishes together, he helped her finish her remaining homework, working through long division problems with the patience Sarah had always shown. When it was time for bed, he tucked her in beneath the quilt Sarah had made before Lily was born, each square carefully chosen and stitched with love. "Good night, princess," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead that smelled faintly of strawberry shampoo. "Night, Daddy. I love you," she murmured, already drifting towards sleep. "Love you too, baby girl. More than all the stars in the sky. Alone in the living room, with only the soft tick of the mantel clock for company." Jack stood before the collection of photographs that served as his shrine to their life before. But it was Sarah's picture that drew his attention. The one taken at the beach during their last vacation, just months before the diagnosis that would change everything. She looked so vibrantly alive in that moment, her honey-colored hair blowing wild in the ocean breeze, her eyes crinkled with genuine laughter at something Lily had said just outside the frame. The first rumble of thunder rolled across the darkening sky outside, a low growl that seemed to shake the small house to its foundation. Jack continued to stare at the photograph, memorizing details he'd already committed to memory 1,000 times before. "I'm trying, hon," he whispered into the gathering darkness, his voice barely audible above the approaching storm. "I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be, the father Lily deserves. Some days are harder than others, but I'm still here." "We're still here." The room gradually faded into deep shadows as another low rumble echoed through the night, promising rain to wash the dust from the streets and the weight from the air. But even in the darkness, Sarah's smile remained visible, a beacon of love and hope that had guided him through 2 years of grief and would continue to light his way forward, one difficult day at a time. The automatic doors of Wilson's Grocery slid open with a soft hiss as Eleanor Jameson stepped inside, grateful to escape the morning heat. Her worn canvas shopping bag swung gently at her side as she grabbed a cart, its wheels squeaking against the linoleum floor. The store buzzed with the usual Saturday morning crowd, shopping carts clogging the aisles like cars in rush-hour traffic. "Excuse me," Ellie murmured, trying to squeeze past a woman blocking the produce section while talking on her phone. The woman didn't move, didn't even glance her way. Ellie sighed and carefully maneuvered around her, selecting a few ripe tomatoes and placing them carefully in her cart. As she moved through the store, she hummed softly, "Amazing Grace," her mother's favorite hymn. The familiar melody brought comfort, even if the lyrics seemed out of place in the rushed atmosphere of impatient shoppers and crying children. She offered a smile to a harried young mother struggling with twins, but received only a blank stare in return. The store had changed over the years, just like the town. Where there used to be friendly greetings and casual conversations between neighbors, now there were people staring at their phones, avoiding eye contact. Ellie remembered teaching many of these townspeople when they were children, back when respect and kindness weren't considered old-fashioned concepts. She was reaching for a loaf of bread when the commotion started near the store entrance. Harsh laughter cut through the usual grocery store sounds, followed by cruel words that made her stomach clench. "Get a job, you bum! Nobody wants you here!" Ellie's arthritis-stiffened fingers gripped her shopping cart as she made her way toward the front of the store. Through the glass doors, she could see a small group of younger adults. She recognized Tom Wilson, the store owner's son, and a few others she'd taught years ago, surrounding someone just outside the entrance. The someone was a man in weathered clothes, his gray beard unkempt, holding a small cardboard sign. Even from inside, Ellie could see the veteran's cap he wore, the edges frayed, but the emblem still. "Proud. Please," she heard him say, his voice barely carrying through the glass. "I'm not asking for money. Just something to eat." "Yeah, right," one of the women sneered. "Probably want it for booze." Ellie's cart forgotten, she pushed through the automatic doors, her heart pounding. "Stop this right now." Her teacher's voice emerged automatically, the tone that had quieted countless rowdy classrooms. "Have you no shame?" The group turned to her, surprise quickly morphing into amusement on their faces. Tom Wilson smirked, crossing his arms. "Stay out of this, Mrs. Jameson. This isn't your classroom anymore." "No, it's not," Ellie agreed, moving to stand between them and the veteran. "But I taught all of you better than this. This man served our country." "Oh, here we go," one of the women cut in, rolling her eyes. "The crazy old lady's going to give us a lecture about respect." Laughter rippled through the group. Someone in the back called out, "Better be careful, she might assign us homework." The veteran behind her shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, please, it's okay. I'll go." "It most certainly is not okay," Ellie insisted, but the man was already backing away, his shoulders hunched, his sign crumpled in his trembling hands. She reached for him, but he turned and hurried away, disappearing around the corner of the building. Ellie spun back to face the group, anger and disappointment burning in her chest. "You should be ashamed of yourselves, all of you. What would your parents say?" "Our parents?" Tom stepped closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe you haven't noticed, Mrs. Jameson, but we're not kids anymore, and times have changed. Nobody needs your outdated morality lessons." "Yeah," another voice chimed in. "Why don't you go home and feed your cats or something?" More laughter. Ellie felt her face flush hot with humiliation. She turned to go back inside, to retrieve her cart and leave with whatever dignity she had left. But her shoe caught on the curb. She stumbled, her shopping bag slipping from her grasp. Cans rolled across the pavement as the group's laughter grew louder. Tears pricked at her eyes as she knelt to gather her scattered groceries. Her knees protested the movement, and her fingers trembled as she reached for a can of soup that had rolled near someone's feet. The laughter seemed to echo in her ears, reminding her of every moment she'd felt obsolete in this changing world. "No one cares anymore," she muttered, her voice thick with unshed tears. The words carried all the weight of her disappointment in the town she'd served for 4 decades, in the students she'd taught, in the community that had once felt like family. "I do." The voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the mockery like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. Ellie looked up to see a tall man standing there, his expression calm but determined. He wore work clothes with grease stains, and his hands were those of someone used to manual labor, but there was a gentleness in the way he knelt down beside her. Jack Turner. She recognized him now, though she'd never spoken to him. Began gathering her scattered groceries, his movements deliberate and careful. He picked up the last can, placed it in her bag, and helped her to her feet with steady hands. The laughter had died away, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. "I care," Jack repeated, louder this time, looking directly at the group of tormentors. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had seen too much to be intimidated by small-town bullies. The summer heat shimmered off the asphalt as Jack Turner stepped between Ellie and her tormentors. His presence brought an immediate change to the atmosphere, like a sudden shift in barometric pressure before a storm. Though he wasn't a tall man, his military bearing made him seem larger, more substantial. "Ma'am," he said quietly to Ellie, then turned to face the group. "I believe these belong to you." He knelt and began gathering her scattered groceries, his movements deliberate and calm. The ringleader, a stocky man in his 30s wearing a polo shirt, sneered. "Well, if it isn't the mechanic playing hero, this ain't your business, Turner." Jack straightened slowly, holding Ellie's paper bag. His face remained neutral, but his eyes, hard as steel, met the other man's gaze. "When we start mocking veterans and kind-hearted ladies in our town, it becomes everyone's business, Don." The mention of his name made Don shift uncomfortably. Jack's quiet authority seemed to drain the group's earlier bravado like air from a tire. "That man needed help," Ellie said, her voice still trembling but stronger now. "All he wanted was a meal." "The shelter serves food," someone muttered half-heartedly. "The shelter's been overwhelmed since the mill closed," Jack replied evenly. "You know that, Susan. Your brother volunteered there last month." Susan, a thin woman near the back of the group, looked away. The crowd began to disperse, mumbling excuses, leaving Don standing alone. He glared at Jack for a moment longer before stalking off toward his truck. In the sudden quiet, Ellie dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Eleanor Jameson. Ellie, Jack Turner." He handed her the grocery bag. "May I walk you home, Miss Jameson?" She nodded gratefully, and they began walking down Main Street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk, and crickets had begun their evening chorus in the grass. "I remember you," Ellie said after a while. "You were in my last English class before I retired, senior year." Jack's expression softened slightly. "That's right. We read To Kill a Mockingbird. You wrote an excellent paper about moral courage," she recalled, her voice warming with the memory. They walked in comfortable silence for a block before Jack spoke again. "My daughter Lily, she loves to read, just like I did at her age." "How old is she?" 10. His voice caught slightly. "She's all I have since my Sarah passed." Ellie's face filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry. I lost my Robert 5 years ago. The house feels so empty sometimes." They paused at a crosswalk, waiting for a truck to pass. In the distance, a train whistle echoed mournfully. "It's hard," Jack admitted, "being alone, trying to raise her right in a world that seems to have forgotten what matters." "Like kindness," Ellie said softly. "Like kindness," he agreed. "And respect. Dignity." He glanced back toward the grocery store. "What happened back there?" "It's not right. The town's changed," Ellie sighed. "Or maybe I'm just getting old and bitter." "No, ma'am," Jack said firmly. "Standing up for others isn't bitter. It's brave." They turned onto Maple Street, where Ellie's small Victorian house stood, surrounded by carefully tended roses. The porch light was already on, casting a warm glow in the gathering dusk. "This is me," Ellie said, climbing the steps. She turned to face him, clutching her grocery bag. "Mr. Turner." "Jack. Would you and Lily like to come by for tea sometime?" The first fireflies of evening began to dance around the porch, their gentle lights mirroring the warmth in Jack's slight smile. "We'd like that," he replied. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek's quiet streets as Jack Turner's old pickup truck rumbled down Maple Avenue. He'd just dropped Lily off at school, her cheerful, "Bye, Dad," still echoing in his ears. The familiar route home took him past Ellie Jameson's house, its white picket fence, usually a symbol of small-town charm. But today was different. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel as his eyes caught the ugly black letters sprayed across the pristine white planks. "Bitter Old Hag." The truck's brakes squealed as he pulled over, his jaw clenched tight. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, thinking about the grocery store incident 2 days ago, about Ellie's kindness toward the homeless veteran, about the mockery she'd endured for simply showing compassion. The spray paint was just another cruel punch, hitting someone already down. Without hesitation, Jack turned his truck around and headed to Henderson's hardware store. 20 minutes later, he was back with white paint, brushes, and a determined expression on his weather-worn face. The morning air was crisp as Jack set up his supplies. He didn't bother asking permission, some things just needed doing. The paint tin opened with a soft pop, and he stirred it carefully, remembering how he used to help Sarah pick colors for their home. "Always stir, never shake," she'd say with a smile. The first brush strokes felt satisfying, watching the hateful words disappear beneath clean white paint. Jack worked steadily, methodically, the way he approached everything in life. Each stroke erased a little more hatred, replaced it with something better. He was halfway done when he heard the screen door creak open behind him. "Jack Turner?" Ellie's voice wavered slightly. "What on earth are you doing?" He turned, paintbrush dripping, and saw her standing on her porch in a flowered housecoat, coffee mug clutched in her hands. Her eyes moved from him to the partially covered graffiti, and her face fell. "Oh dear Lord," she whispered. "When did that happen?" Jack replied, continuing to paint. "Don't worry about it, Mrs. Jameson. It'll be gone in no time." Ellie walked down her porch steps, her slippered feet making soft sounds on the concrete. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've already done so much. It's just paint." Jack shrugged, but his eyes were kind when he looked at her. "Besides, my daddy always said fences are like faces, they ought to be clean." A small laugh escaped Ellie's lips, surprising them both. "Your daddy sounds like he was a wise man." "He had his moments," Jack smiled, dipping his brush back in the paint, though he probably stole that line from someone else. They shared another laugh, and suddenly the morning felt lighter. Ellie disappeared inside and returned with 2 cups of fresh coffee. They talked while Jack worked, sharing stories about their fathers, about small-town life, about how things had changed over the years. Around 3 o'clock, Lily came bouncing down the sidewalk, her backpack swinging. Her face lit up when she saw them. "Dad, Mrs. Jameson!" She ran over, looking at the newly painted fence. "Are you painting? Can I help?" Jack glanced at Ellie, who nodded with a warm smile. "Well," he said, "we could use an artist's touch. What do you think about adding some flowers along the bottom?" Lily's eyes sparkled. "Really? I can paint flowers?" Ellie disappeared into her garage and returned with some leftover paint in various colors. Soon, Lily was carefully painting small daisies and tulips along the fence's base, her tongue sticking out in concentration. None of them noticed the woman across the street, phone raised, taking pictures. Later that night, Ellie sat in her favorite armchair, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she scrolled through Facebook on her tablet. Her heart, so light just hours ago, grew heavier with each swipe of her finger. There were the photos, Jack painting her fence, Lily adding flowers, Ellie bringing them drinks. But the comments beneath turned something beautiful into something ugly. "Looks like the old bat found herself a boy toy. Poor man. Probably feels sorry for her. What kind of example is he setting for his daughter? Inappropriate much?" Thunder rumbled outside her window as tears welled in Ellie's eyes, blurring the cruel words on the screen. One drop fell, then another, landing on the tablet's surface like rain on a window pane. The warmth of the day, the laughter, the shared coffee, the simple joy of Lily's painted flowers seemed to fade away, replaced by the cold reality of small-town judgment. Ellie set the tablet down with trembling hands as another rumble of thunder shook the night air. The bell above Annie's diner chimed as the morning crowd bustled in for their usual breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the warm air. Ruth Ann Blevins sat at her regular corner booth, surrounded by her church committee friends, their whispers cutting through the clinking of silverware. "Did you see those pictures?" Ruth Ann's perfectly styled gray hair bobbed as she leaned forward. "A widow and a widower, spending time alone together? It's just not proper. And him with a young daughter," Betty Wilson added, stirring her coffee with unnecessary force. "What kind of example is that setting?" The diner's door opened again, and Jack Turner walked in, His work shirt crisped despite the early hour. The whispers grew louder, less subtle. He stood at the counter, ordered his usual breakfast sandwich to go, and waited quietly. His shoulders were straight, but tension lined his jaw. "Morning, Jack," Sarah, the waitress, said softly. She handed him his paper bag, her eyes apologetic. Jack placed exact change on the counter. "Thanks, Sarah." He turned and walked out, his boots echoing on the linoleum floor. The whispers followed him like shadows. Later that morning, Jack's auto shop stood unusually quiet. 2 regular customers had called to cancel their appointments. Mrs. Henderson, who'd brought her car to him for years, claimed her nephew would handle her repairs from now on. Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag, leaving dark smudges that matched the heaviness in his chest. At the grocery store, Ellie pushed her cart down the cereal aisle, pretending not to notice how Mrs. Peterson hurried her children to the other side. The same people who'd smiled at her for 30 years now avoided her eyes. She reached for a box of cereal, her hand trembling slightly. Ellie, Martha James, her former teaching colleague, approached hesitantly. "I think maybe you should skip this week's reading circle at the library, just until things settle down." Ellie's throat tightened. "I've been reading to those children every Tuesday for 5 years. I know, but the parents have concerns." Martha's voice dropped to a whisper. "About you and Jack Turner." The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. Ellie abandoned her shopping cart and walked out, leaving Martha standing among the cheerful cereal boxes. At Willow Creek Elementary, Lily sat alone at lunch, her sandwich untouched. 2 girls from her class walked past, giggling behind their hands. "Hey, Lily," one called out. "Is that old lady going to be your new mom?" "My mom says it's weird," the other added. "Your dad hanging around Miss Jameson all the time." Lily's chin quivered, but she remembered what her mother had taught her about being brave. She picked up her lunch tray and moved to another table, her back straight like her father's. That afternoon, Jack found Lily in her room, homework spread across her bed but her pencil still. Her eyes were red. "Want to talk about it, sweetheart?" He sat beside her, the bed creaking under his weight. "The kids at school." Lily's voice wavered. "They said mean things about you and Miss Ellie. They said you're dating her, but they said it like it was something bad." Jack's heart ached. He pulled her close, smelling the strawberry shampoo she loved. "You know what's funny about kindness?" he said softly. "Sometimes when you do the right thing, people don't understand. They get scared or angry because it's different from what they're used to." "Like when you helped paint Miss Ellie's fence?" "Exactly." He smoothed her hair. "Being kind isn't always popular, but it's always right. Your mom knew that better than anyone." Lily nodded against his shoulder. "I miss her." "Me too, baby. Every day." Across town, Ellie sat in her darkened living room, watching the sunset paint the walls gold. Her phone showed 3 missed calls. From the library board. She'd been teaching reading there since retirement, but now she wrapped her arms around herself, guilt weighing heavy in her chest. Maybe if she stayed away from Jack and Lily, the rumors would die down. Maybe their lives could go back to normal. The doorbell rang, startling her from her thoughts. Through the window, she saw Jack standing on her porch, holding what looked like takeout bags from Mario's Italian restaurant. When she opened the door, he held up the bags. "Thought you might be hungry." His eyes were kind but determined. "If we stop caring because people talk, then they win." Ellie hesitated, one hand still on the doorknob. The aroma of garlic bread wafted from the bags, and something else, the scent of compassion, of friendship, offered freely, despite the cost. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, Jack," she said softly, and for the first time that day, her smile reached her eyes. The aroma of fresh-baked lasagna wafted through Ellie's small kitchen. She hadn't cooked for anyone in years, and her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the steaming dish from the oven. Jack and Lily sat at her worn oak table, the evening light streaming through lace curtains that had hung there since 1985. "It smells amazing, Mrs. Jameson." Lily's eyes sparkled as she bounced in her chair. "Please, dear, call me Ellie." She set the dish on a potholder, her cheeks warming at the compliment. "Though I warn you, I'm a bit out of practice with cooking for company." Jack smiled. the corners of his eyes crinkling. Can't be worse than my attempts at mac and cheese. Dad burns everything, Lily Stage whispered, earning a playful hair ruffle from her father. Hey now, I make a mean peanut butter sandwich. Jack's mock defensive tone brought genuine laughter from Ellie, the first real laugh she'd had since the scandal began. They settled into an easy rhythm as they passed the salad bowl and broke warm garlic bread. The tension of the past few days seemed to melt away within these walls, replaced by the simple pleasure of shared food and company. This is wonderful, Jack said between bites. Sarah used to make lasagna too, though never quite this good. His voice caught slightly at his wife's name, but his smile remained gentle. Lily nodded enthusiastically, marinara sauce dotting her chin. Mom's always had too much pepper. Did you teach cooking too, along with English? Jack asked, passing Ellie the breadbasket. Oh no, this is just years of cooking for one. She paused, then added softly, it's nice having people to share it with again. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on Lily's school projects, Jack's latest car repair challenges, and eventually turning to the state of the local veteran shelter. Ellie had noticed its deteriorating condition during her walks downtown. The roof's getting worse, Jack mentioned, his expression growing serious. Saw water damage last time I dropped off some supplies. They're struggling to find volunteers for repairs. Ellie set down her fork, straightening in her chair. Why don't we help? I mean, together? The words tumbled out before she could second-guess them. I could teach some basic reading and writing classes. So many veterans struggle with paperwork for benefits, and… She stopped, suddenly self-conscious. But Lily clapped her hands. Yes, Dad's really good at fixing things. He could help with the roof. Jack ran a hand through his hair, hesitating. Ellie could see the conflict in his eyes, wanting to help but wary of more town gossip. The shelter needs it, she said quietly, and maybe we need it too. He studied his plate for a long moment, then looked up with determination. If it helps someone, it's worth it. The next morning found them pulling up to the shelter in Jack's truck. The building's faded brick exterior and sagging gutters spoke of years of neglect. A few veterans sat on the front steps, nodding cautiously as they approached. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they met with Maria, the shelter's overworked coordinator. Her face lit up at their offer to help, especially when Ellie mentioned the literacy classes. Many of our residents struggle with reading, Maria explained, leading them through the common room where several men sat playing cards or reading old magazines. It affects their job applications, medical forms, everything. Jack examined the ceiling, where water stains spread like dark continents across the tiles. This roof won't last another winter, he muttered, making mental notes. They spent the morning getting oriented. Ellie sat up in a corner of the common room with some borrowed folding chairs and a whiteboard, while Jack climbed up to assess the roof damage. Lily flitted between helping both of them, delivering water bottles, and sharing her bright smile with everyone she met. Over the next few hours, Ellie worked with 3 veterans who wanted help with reading. Their determination to learn touched her deeply. One man, probably in his 50s, fought back tears when he successfully read his first complete paragraph. Jack recruited 2 younger veterans to help with the roof repairs, teaching them basic carpentry as they worked. The steady rhythm of hammers echoed through the building, a heartbeat of renewal. As the sun began to set, Ellie stood in the shelter's doorway, watching Jack demonstrate proper hammer technique to Lily on the porch. His patient instructions and her determined expression made something warm bloom in Ellie's chest. See, sweetheart? Let the weight of the hammer do the work. You don't have to force it. Lily's tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated, carefully driving the nail into the wood. Like this, Dad? Perfect. Jack's proud smile matched his daughter's beaming face. Ellie leaned against the doorframe, taking in the scene before her. The golden evening light cast long shadows across the fies, porch, and somewhere nearby, a mourning dove called softly. Despite everything, the gossip, the stares, the cruel words, they were here, making a difference. Maybe people still do care, she whispered. more to herself than anyone else, as the day's last rays painted the sky in shades of hope. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shelter's dusty windows as Ellie stood before a small group of veterans. Her old teacher's easel, rescued from her garage, held a worn whiteboard with neat handwriting. 6 men sat in mismatched chairs, their faces a mix of uncertainty and quiet hope. "Today, we'll start with something simple," Ellie said, her voice gentle but clear. She'd taught for 35 years, but these nervous butterflies in her stomach felt like her first day all over again. "We're going to read a story together." Outside, the steady rhythm of Jack's hammer rang out as he worked on the shelter's creaky porch. The familiar sound gave Ellie courage. She handed out paperback copies of Old Man and the Sea, books she'd kept from her teaching days. Tom, a younger veteran with a scraggly beard, stared at his copy like it might bite. "Ma'am, I haven't read anything longer than a street sign in years." Ellie pulled up a chair, sitting at their level. "Then we'll start slow, Tom. No pressure here." She smiled warmly. "Would anyone like to read the first paragraph?" Silence filled the room. Then Marcus, an older veteran with gray-streaked hair, cleared his throat. "I'll try, Miss Ellie." His voice was rough, but determined as he began to read, stopping occasionally to sound out longer words. Through the window, Ellie could see Jack measuring boards for the porch repairs. His movements were precise, methodical, the same careful attention he gave to fixing engines now directed at mending this broken piece of their community. As Marcus finished the paragraph, pride glowed in his weathered face. The other veterans nodded encouragingly, their initial tension beginning to ease. "That was excellent, Marcus," Ellie said. She turned to the group. "Now, what do you think about that old fisherman? Reminds me of all of you, stronger than you know." The discussion that followed started hesitantly, but grew more animated. These men had stories of their own, and slowly, they began to share them between passages from the book. Around 4 o'clock, the shelter's front door creaked open. Lily bounced in, carrying a large Tupperware container. The smell of chocolate chip cookies filled the room. "I baked these with Dad last night," she announced, her smile brightening the dim space. "They're still kind of soft." The veterans' faces softened at her presence. Even the most withdrawn among them couldn't help but smile as she carefully handed out napkins and cookies. "Thank you, sweetheart," said Robert, a veteran who hadn't spoken all afternoon. He took a bite and closed his eyes. "Just like my mama used to make." Jack appeared in the doorway, wiping sawdust from his hands. He watched his daughter move among the veterans with such natural kindness, and his eyes met Ellie's across the room. They shared a quiet moment of understanding. Then, something was changing here, something important. As the afternoon wore on, more surprises arrived. Sarah Chen from the grocery store peeked in, carrying 2 boxes of donated books. "I heard about what you're doing here," she said to Ellie. "Thought these might help." Then Mike Thompson, who owned the hardware store, dropped off some extra supplies for Jack's repairs. "Figured you could use these," he mumbled, then stayed to help install a new handrail. The veterans watched this steady stream of townspeople with growing wonder. During a break, one of them, James, who always sat in the back corner, approached Jack as he worked. "You know something?" James said quietly, helping Jack hold a board in place. "It's been a long time since anyone cared what happened to this place. To us." Jack drove another nail home before responding. Sometimes people just need reminding of what matters. By sunset, the shelter felt different. The new porch boards gleamed honey gold in the fading light. Inside, the stack of donated books had grown, and empty cookie containers sat beside well-worn copies of Hemingway. The veterans lingered, reluctant to leave this warm space where they'd found unexpected fellowship. As they packed up to leave, Marcus touched Ellie's arm. "Thank you, Miss Ellie, for seeing us, really seeing us." Ellie had to turn away to wipe her eyes. Jack pretended not to notice as he gathered his tools, but his own throat felt tight. Later that night, Jack tucked Lily into bed. Her room was cozy, walls covered with her drawings, including a new one of the shelter, complete with stick figures of veterans holding books. "Daddy?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Do you think being kind can fix people?" Jack sat on the edge of her bed, considering her question. The day's events played through his mind. The veterans finding their voices, the townspeople dropping by with donations, the way Ellie's gentle patience had drawn out even the most reluctant reader. He thought of his own broken pieces, slowly mending through these small acts of care. He smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. It's the only thing that ever does. The Saturday morning sun warmed the red brick facade of the Willow Creek post office as Jack Turner pulled his weathered pickup into a parking spot. Lily bounced in the passenger seat, clutching a handful of letters they'd collected from veterans at the shelter, messages to far-off family members they hoped to reconnect with. "Look, Daddy. There's Grandma Ellie!" Lily pointed through the windshield. Ellie stood near the post office steps, sorting through her mail. Her gray hair caught the morning light, and she wore a simple floral dress that made her look younger somehow. But Jack's stomach tightened when he spotted Ruth Ann. Blevins approaching from the opposite direction, her church hat perched high like a crown. "Be nice," Jack whispered to himself, echoing what he often told Lily. As they stepped out of the truck, Ruth Ann's lips pressed into a thin line. She clutched her purse closer, as if their mere presence might contaminate it. But then Lily skipped forward, her pigtails bouncing. "Good morning, Mrs. Blevins," Lily chirped. "I love your hat. It has such pretty flowers." Ruth Ann's stern expression wavered. "Why, thank you, Lily." She touched the silk roses self-consciously. "Your mother always did say you had good manners." Jack noticed how Ruth Ann's voice softened at the mention of Sarah. His late wife had been on the church committee with Ruth Ann, always finding ways to gentle the older woman's sharp edges. "Morning, Ruth Ann," Ellie said pleasantly, though Jack could see tension in her shoulders. Ruth Ann gave a curt nod and hurried inside, but not before Jack caught something uncertain in her eyes, almost like guilt. "She's lonely," Lily declared once Ruth Ann was out of earshot. "That's why she's so grumpy," Ellie chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're wise beyond your years, little one." She held up the local newspaper. "Have you seen this morning's Gazette?" Jack took the paper, and there on page 3 was a modest article titled, "Local Veterans Find Hope at Shelter." Below it was a photo of Jack teaching a young veteran how to repair a car engine, while Ellie sat nearby helping another with reading practice. Through the combined efforts of local residents, Jack Turner and Eleanor Jameson, Jack read aloud. "The struggling veterans shelter has become a place of learning and healing." He smiled. "They made us sound pretty good. Keep reading," Ellie urged, her eyes bright. "Anonymous donors have begun contributing to the shelter's renovation fund," Jack continued. "Last week's donations totaled over $500. He lowered the rang. "Paper. Well, I'll be." Lily clapped her hands. "That means we can fix the leaky roof." "It's a start," Jack agreed, folding the paper carefully. "Would you like to join us for coffee, Ellie?" The diner's quiet this time of morning. 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at May's Diner. Lily colored quietly, while Jack and Ellie talked over steaming mugs of coffee. The morning crowd hadn't arrived yet, leaving them in peaceful semi-privacy. "Sarah loved this place," Jack said suddenly, running his finger along the rim of his cup. "She'd bring Lily here every Saturday morning for pancakes, even during the chemotherapy." Ellie reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. "Tell me about her?" Jack took a deep breath. "She was sunshine. That's the best way I can describe her. Even at the end, when the pain was worst, she'd find ways to make the nurses laugh." He swallowed hard. "I could fix engines all day long, but I couldn't fix her." "Oh, Jack," Ellie whispered. "Sometimes I think that's why I push so hard at the shelter," he admitted. "Every person we help feels like I'm doing what I couldn't do for her." Ellie nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I know something about that kind of guilt. When I retired early, I felt like I was abandoning my students." She stirred her coffee slowly. "Teaching was my whole life. But the pressure, the politics, the endless testing. I burned out. Couldn't even look at a classroom without panic attacks." "That must have been hard," Jack said softly. "I felt like such a failure," Ellie continued. 35 years of teaching, and I couldn't even make it to the finish line properly. But these veterans were helping. They're teaching me that it's never too late to make a difference." Jack noticed how the morning light caught the silver in her hair, how her eyes still held that teacher's spark, when she talked about helping others. Their friendship had grown into something precious, not romance, but a deep understanding that filled empty spaces in both their hearts. Look what I made. Lily held up her coloring page, a bright rainbow arching over stick figures holding hands. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Ellie said. Who are the people? That's Daddy, and me, and you. Lily pointed to each figure. And the rainbow is like hope. That's what my teacher says rainbows mean. Jack caught Ellie's eye over Lily's head, sharing a warm smile. Later, as the sun began its descent, they stood in the shelter's newly repaired front room. Ellie pulled something from her bag, a simple frame holding elegant calligraphy. This hung in my classroom for 20 years, she said, handing it to Jack. I think it belongs here now. Jack read the words aloud. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. He ran his fingers over the frame's worn edges. Thank you, Ellie. This is perfect. Lily Turner burst through the front door of their modest home, her backpack bouncing wildly against her shoulders. Her face glowed with excitement as she waved a bright yellow paper in the air. Jack looked up from the bills he'd been sorting at the kitchen table, his worried expression melting into a smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. Dad, look what we got at school today. Lily rushed over, nearly knocking over his coffee cup in her haste to show him the paper. It's an essay contest! Jack steadied the cup and took the flyer from her hands. Slow down there, sweetie. Let me see what's got you so worked up. His eyes scanned the page, reading aloud. Why Caring Still Matters, a community essay contest for elementary students. Can I enter, please? Lily clasped her hands together, bouncing on her toes. Her brown eyes, so much like her mother's, sparkled with hope. Jack set the paper down and pulled out a chair for her. Of course you can. Come sit and tell me what you're thinking about writing. Lily plopped down in the chair, her feet swinging beneath the table. I want to write about Miss Ellie, she declared without hesitation. Jack's eyebrows rose. Miss Ellie? Yeah. Lily nodded emphatically. Remember when those mean people wrote on her fence, and you helped paint over it? And now she teaches the veterans to read better. And she always brings cookies to the shelter. And she listens to everyone's stories. She took a deep breath. That's what caring looks like, right? Jack felt a warmth spread through his chest. You're right, sweetheart. Miss Ellie does show us what caring looks like. They spent the next hour at the kitchen table, Lily excitedly sharing her ideas while Jack jotted them down on notebook paper. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting a golden glow over their work session. What about when she defended that homeless veteran at the grocery store? Lily asked, chewing thoughtfully on her pencil eraser. Jack nodded. That's actually how we met Miss Ellie. She stood up for what was right, even when it wasn't easy. That's what I want to write about. Lily straightened in her chair. About being brave enough to be kind, even when other people aren't. Jack watched as his daughter began writing, her small hand moving across the paper with determination. She refused his help with the actual writing, insisting, It has to come from my heart, Dad. The rest of the evening passed quietly. Lily worked diligently at the kitchen table, while Jack prepared dinner, occasionally glancing over to see her deep in concentration, her tongue poking out slightly as she wrote. After dinner, Lily proudly presented her first draft. I'm going to edit it tomorrow, she announced. Mrs. Peterson says, good writers always edit their work. That's very wise, Jack agreed, carefully placing the pages on his nightstand. How about we get you ready for bed? Later that night, after Lily was fast asleep, Jack sat on the edge of his bed and picked up her essay. The handwriting was slightly crooked in places, but the growed. Words were clear and honest. Why Caring Still Matters, by Lily Turner. Some people think caring isn't cool anymore. They think it's better to be mean or to pretend they don't see when others are hurting. But I know someone who shows that caring is the bravest thing you can do. Her name is Miss Ellie. Miss Ellie used to be a teacher, but now she teaches in a different way. She teaches people how to be brave and kind. When she saw someone being bullied, she stood up and said it was wrong. Even when people laughed at her, she didn't stop caring. My dad says that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always important. Miss Ellie shows this every day. She helps veterans learn to read better at the shelter. She remembers everyone's birthday. She listens when people are sad. Some people in town were mean to her because she was different. They wrote mean words on her fence. But Miss Ellie didn't get mean back. Instead, she kept being kind. She showed me that caring isn't weak. It's like a superpower that makes the whole world better. Now more people are starting to care too. The shelter has more volunteers. People smile more. It's like Miss Ellie planted seeds of kindness, and they're starting to grow. I think caring still matters, because it's the only thing that can change sadness into hope. Miss Ellie taught me that one person who cares can make a difference. And if we all cared a little more, imagine how beautiful our town could be. Jack wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, careful not to let his tears fall on the paper. His daughter's words captured everything he'd been trying to teach her about kindness and courage. Sarah would have been so proud. The next morning, Lily submitted her essay to Mrs. Peterson with a confident smile. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with Ellie, Jack couldn't keep the secret any longer. Lily entered the school essay contest today, he mentioned, passing the cornbread to Ellie. Oh, Ellie's eyes brightened with interest. What did you write about, dear? Lily grinned at her father, then looked at Ellie. I wrote about you. About me? Ellie's fork clattered against her plate. Whatever for? Because you show everyone why caring still matters, Lily explained matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Ellie's eyes welled up, and she let out a soft laugh that seemed to catch in her throat. Oh, my sweet girl. Jack raised his glass of sweet tea. I think this calls for a toast. To Lily's essay, and to the person who inspired it. Ellie raised her own glass, her hands trembling slightly, and to being there for the award ceremony together, win or lose. Their glasses clinked gently, and Lily beamed at them both, her face glowing with pride and love. The school gymnasium buzzed with nervous energy that Saturday morning. Folding chairs squeaked against the polished floor as parents and teachers filed in, filling row after row beneath the fluorescent lights and faded championship banners. Jack Turner sat near the front, his work shirt freshly pressed despite the lingering scent of motor oil. His fingers drummed anxiously against his knee. Ellie Jamieson settled into the chair beside him, her silver hair neatly pinned back, wearing her favorite powder blue cardigan. She reached over and patted his hand. She'll do wonderfully, she whispered. The principal, Mr. Henderson, stepped up to the microphone, tapping it twice. The feedback echoed through the gym, causing several people to wince. Welcome everyone to our annual Willow Creek Middle School essay contest. His voice carried across the packed room. This year's theme was Why Caring Still Matters. Jack spotted Ruth Ann Blevins in the third row, her church hat tilted at its usual precise angle. She caught his eye, and, to his surprise, gave a small nod. The contestants sat in a nervous line on metal folding chairs near the podium. Lily wore the dress she'd picked out special for today, yellow with white daisies, her mother's favorite flowers. Her hands clutched her essay pages, slightly crumpled from constant reading and rereading. And now, Mr. Henderson continued, we'll announce our winners, starting with honorable mentions. Jack held his breath as each name was called. Lily sat perfectly still, her face a mirror of Sarah's quiet determination. 2 honorable mentions, 3rd place, 2nd place. With each announcement, Jack's heart beat faster. And 1st place, Mr. Henderson paused, smiling, goes to Miss Lily Turner for her essay, The Courage to Care. The gym erupted in applause. Jack felt tears prick at his eyes as Lily stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. She walked to the podium, her small frame barely visible behind it. Mr. Henderson adjusted the microphone down to her height. Lily took a deep breath and began to read. Last month, I learned what real courage looks like. It wasn't in a superhero movie or a book. It was in our grocery store when Miss Ellie stood up for someone everyone else ignored. The room grew silent, Jack glanced at Ellie, who sat perfectly still, her eyes glistening. Miss Ellie showed me that caring isn't weakness, it's bravery. Lily's voice grew stronger. She teaches veterans to read at the shelter, even when people said mean things about her. She bakes cookies for people who are lonely. She helped my dad smile again. A few sniffles could be heard in the crowd. Jack noticed Ruth Ann dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Some people say no one cares anymore. But they're wrong. My dad cares. He fixes things for people who can't afford it. The veterans at the shelter care. They help each other even when they're hurting. And Miss Ellie cares most of all. Lily looked up from her paper, her voice clear and steady. Caring isn't always easy. Sometimes people laugh at you. Sometimes they say you're silly or weak. But Miss Ellie taught me that those are the times when caring matters most. Because that's when you show others how to be brave too. By now, several people were openly wiping tears. A young reporter from the Willow Creek Gazette scribbled furiously in his notebook. So next time someone tells you that no one cares anymore, remember Miss Ellie. Remember the veterans learning to read. Remember my dad fixing the shelter roof. Remember that caring isn't just about feeling. It's about doing something brave to help others, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The applause started before Lily finished her last sentence, building into a standing ovation. Jack stood, his chest swelling with pride and something else. Hope, he realized. Real hope. For the first time since Sarah died. After the ceremony, people crowded around them. The reporter asked for photos and quotes for Monday's paper. The bank president handed Jack his business card, mentioning something about a donation fund for the shelter. Even Ruth Ann approached, her eyes still red-rimmed. "That child of yours," she said softly. "She sees right into the heart of things, doesn't she?" The gymnasium slowly emptied as the afternoon light slanted through the high windows. Lily clutched her blue ribbon and certificate, accepting hugs and congratulations with shy grace. Outside in the parking lot, the spring air was sweet with blooming dogwood. Lily ran ahead to show her ribbon to her best friend, leaving Jack and Ellie standing by his old pickup truck. Ellie turned to him, her eyes bright. "You've made me proud," she said simply, pulling him into a warm hug. Jack's voice was rough with emotion as he pulled back. "No, ma'am," he replied softly. "You made me believe again." Jack's phone buzzed angrily at 6 a.m., jolting him from a restless sleep. 3 missed calls already lit up his screen. Rubbing his eyes, he sat up in bed, his heart racing as message notifications kept popping up. Something was wrong. "Dad!" Lily's voice called from downstairs. "Someone's at the door!" Still in his old t-shirt and sweatpants, Jack hurried down the creaking stairs. Through the front window, he could see Tom Wilson, one of his regular customers, pacing on the porch with a phone in his hand. "Hold on," Jack called out, opening the door. "Tom? What's going on?" Tom's face was red with embarrassment. "Jack, I hate to be the one, but you need to see this." He held up his phone, showing a social media post that made Jack's stomach drop. There was a photo of him and Ellie at the essay contest, but it had been edited. What was originally an innocent moment of celebration now looked intimate, with added shadows and a suggestive caption, "Town Hero" or "Home Wrecker." The truth about Jack Turner and Eleanor Jameson. "I know it's not true," Tom said quickly. "But it's all over town. Ruth Ann shared it in the church group and, well," Jack's phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus from the Veterans Shelter's Board of Directors. "Jack, we need to talk." The shelter's biggest donor just pulled out, citing moral concerns. The room seemed to tilt. Jack gripped the doorframe, his breathing becoming shallow. The familiar tightness in his chest returned. The same feeling he'd had in Iraq when, no, not now. He forced himself to focus on Tom's voice. "I'll still bring my truck in next week," Tom was saying. "But some folks, they're not so understanding." After Tom left, Jack's phone kept ringing. Each call brought worse news. 3 volunteers canceled their shelter shifts. 2 more customers postponed their repairs indefinitely. The local paper wanted a comment on the developing situation. By mid-morning, his head was pounding. Lily had gone to school, though he'd seen the worry in her eyes. She was too young to understand everything, but old enough to know something was wrong. The workshop stayed eerily quiet all morning. No customers came in. Around noon, he heard the gentle tap of familiar footsteps on the gravel outside. "Jack?" Ellie's voice wavered slightly. She stood in the doorway, clutching her purse tightly. Her face showed the strain of the morning's events. "I saw the post. I'm so sorry." He couldn't look at her directly. His hands were shaking as he wiped them clean with a shop rag. The smell of grease and metal usually calmed him, but today it reminded him of burning vehicles, of smoke and screams, and Jack? Ellie stepped closer, concerned. "Don't," he said more sharply than he meant to. His chest felt tight again. "Please, I need space. We can fight this," she insisted. "Ruth Ann's gone too far this time. We can tell people the truth." But Jack was barely hearing her. In his mind, he was back in the Humvee, watching his best friend die, helpless to stop it. Just like he'd been helpless when Sarah got sick. Just like he was helpless now, watching everything they'd built at the shelter crumbling because of cruel lies. "The shelter needs you," Ellie's voice broke through. "The veterans need you." The shelter needs its donations," Jack cut in, his voice hollow. "The veterans need their programs. What they don't need is more controversy, more problems." He turned away, gripping the edge of his workbench. "Maybe it's better if I step back for a while." "Jack Turner," Ellie's teacher voice emerged, stern but gentle. "Don't you dare let them win like this." But he could feel himself shutting down, retreating behind the walls he'd built long ago. It was safer there. Safer for everyone. "Please, Ellie, just go." She stood there for a long moment. He could feel her eyes on him, could almost hear the words she wanted to say. Finally, her footsteps retreated slowly across the gravel. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jack went through the motions of closing up shop, though there had been no work to do. He picked up Lily from school, made dinner, helped with homework, all while feeling like he was watching himself from a distance. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, the memories flooded back. Iraq, Sarah's hospital room, the cruel comments online. Around midnight, he gave up and sat in his garage, staring at old photos of happier times. His phone buzzed one last time. A text from Marcus. "Board meeting tomorrow. Need to discuss your role at shelter." Jack turned the phone off and buried his face in his hands. Miles away in her modest home, Ellie knelt beside her bed, just as she had every night for decades. But tonight, her prayers carried a special urgency. "Lord," she whispered into the darkness, "don't let him lose hope again." Her words seemed to hang in the still air as a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, its lonely cry echoing through the night. The midnight sky over Willow Creek shattered with the piercing wail of sirens. Jack bolted upright in bed, his military instincts kicking in before his mind fully woke. Red and blue lights flashed through his bedroom window, casting eerie shadows on the walls. His phone exploded with notifications. "Fire at veteran shelter. Emergency response needed." Jack's heart stopped. Without thinking, he sprinted down the stairs, not even bothering with shoes. "Mrs. Peterson!" he shouted, banging on his elderly neighbor's door. "Watch Lily!" The summer asphalt burned his bare feet as he ran the 6 blocks to the shelter. The night air grew thicker with each step, filling with acrid smoke that made his eyes water. As he rounded the corner onto Pine Street, his world turned orange. Flames licked the night sky, consuming the old wooden building. Fire trucks were just arriving, their crews jumping into action. But Jack knew the layout better than anyone. He'd spent weeks fixing every corner of that place. "2 veterans still inside," someone shouted. "2nd floor." Jack recognized the voice. It was Mike, one of his literacy students from Ellie's class. The elderly veteran was being held back by firefighters, pointing frantically at an upstairs window where shadows moved behind the smoke. Without hesitation, Jack sprinted toward the building. A firefighter tried to grab his arm, but Jack twisted away, his combat training taking over. The heat hit him like a wall as he burst through the front door, dropping low where the air was clearest. "Pete! Walter!" he shouted, remembering the two veterans who slept upstairs. The smoke burned his lungs, but he pushed forward, crawling up the stairs on his hands and knees. The wooden steps groaned under his weight. The second floor was a maze of fire and shadow. Jack heard coughing from the far room, where they'd just fixed the window last week. Pushing through the heat, he found Pete first, slumped against a wall. "I got you, soldier," Jack grunted, hoisting the unconscious man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry. The stairs creaked dangerously as he descended, depositing Pete with the paramedics outside before turning back. The building was groaning now, timbers cracking in the intense heat. Jack's lungs screamed for clean air, but Walter was still up there. Back into the inferno he went, fighting against every instinct to run. He found Walter trapped under a fallen beam in the hallway. The old veteran was conscious but pinned. Jack's bare feet were blistering on the hot floor as he struggled with the beam, finally managing to lift it enough for Walter to crawl free. They were halfway down the stairs when the roof began to collapse. Jack shoved Walter ahead of him, feeling searing pain as burning debris rained down on his back and shoulders. They burst out the front door just as the building gave an almighty groan. The structure collapsed behind them in a roar of flame and splintering wood. The force of it knocked Jack forward onto the grass. Everything went hazy after that. Shouting voices, hands pulling him away from the heat, the cool touch of oxygen being placed over his face. Through the blur, he heard a familiar voice screaming his name. Ellie. She appeared above him, her face streaked with tears, her gray hair wild around her shoulders. She must have run here in her nightgown, just as he had come barefoot. "Jack! Oh God, Jack!" She grabbed his hand, and he felt the gentle squeeze of her fingers through the fog of pain. The paramedics were working around them, cutting away his smoke-damaged shirt, treating the burns on his back. He had to know. Had to make sure it wasn't for nothing. His throat felt like he'd swallowed glass, but he forced the words out anyway. "Did they make it?" he whispered. Through her tears, Ellie nodded, squeezing his hand tighter. "You saved them, Jack." He closed his eyes then, letting the pain medication pull him under. The last thing he felt was Ellie's hand in his, an anchor in the darkness, as solid and real as the ground beneath him. The sirens faded to a distant wail, and the night that had burned so bright slowly dimmed to black. The sterile hospital room felt too white, too quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors. Ellie sat in the worn visitor's chair, her weathered hands clutching another of Lily's colorful get-well cards. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, casting soft shadows across Jack's bandaged form. 3 days had passed since the fire, and Jack had drifted in and out of consciousness. The doctors said he'd been lucky. The smoke inhalation could have been worse, and his burns would heal. But seeing him like this, vulnerable and still, made Ellie's heart ache. "I brought you another masterpiece from Lily," she said softly, even though she wasn't sure if he could hear. She placed the card on his bedside table, joining the small collection that had grown there. "She used extra glitter on this one. Says it'll help you shine your way back to us." The steady rhythm of the heart monitor filled the silence. Ellie reached out and gently patted Jack's unbandaged hand, careful to avoid the IV line. His skin felt warm, too warm still, but better than yesterday. "The veterans you saved are doing well," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Tommy and Marcus, they've been asking about you. The whole shelter community has. You're their hero, Jack Turner, whether you wanted to be or not." A slight movement caught her attention. Jack's fingers twitched, and his eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. "Ellie?" His voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. "I'm here." She leaned forward, squeezing his hand gently. "Don't try to talk too much. You've been through quite an ordeal." Jack swallowed hard, his throat visibly working. "Lily? She's at school, but she'll be here after. That girl of yours is something special. She's been so brave through all this." A ghost of a smile crossed Jack's cracked lips, but then his expression grew serious, almost pained. "I'm sorry," he managed, each word seeming to cost him effort. "I almost gave up again. When things got hard, I pulled away." Ellie's eyes welled with tears. "Oh, Jack, you have nothing to apologize for." "No," he insisted, his voice growing slightly stronger. "I let the gossip, let their hate, get to me. Started having the nightmares again. Couldn't face anyone. Not even you, Jack Turner." Ellie's voice was firm but gentle. "Listen to me. You stood up when I couldn't. That day in the grocery store, when everyone else just watched and laughed, you gave me back my courage, and you've been giving it back every day since." Outside in the hallway, Ruth Ann Blevins stood frozen, her hand clutching her purse strap. She'd come to check on Jack, to ease her conscience more than anything else, but now found herself rooted to the spot, eavesdropping on their conversation. "You don't understand," Jack continued, his voice breaking. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd never find purpose again. Then you showed up, speaking truth when nobody else would, fighting for what's right. You and Lily. You made me believe again." "And you," Ellie replied, wiping away a tear. "You showed me that one person's kindness can change everything. That old saying about no one caring anymore, you proved me wrong, Jack. You proved us all wrong." In the hallway, Ruth Ann's composure crumbled. The weight of her actions, the rumors she'd spread, the lives she'd tried to damage, came crashing down. Her shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. "The shelter," Jack started to ask, but Ellie shushed him. "We'll rebuild," she assured him. "The community's already started a fund. Even some of your old customers are contributing. People are finally remembering what it means to care." Ruth Ann couldn't bear to listen anymore. Her heels clicked rapidly against the linoleum as she hurried down the corridor, vision blurred by tears. She found herself pushing open the door to the hospital chapel, its quiet darkness welcoming her. The small room was empty, lit only by a few flickering candles. Ruth Ann's knees gave out as she reached the front pew. She sank down, her perfectly coiffed hair coming undone as she bowed her head. "Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I was wrong, so terribly wrong." Her shoulders shook with fresh sobs as the full impact of her actions washed over her. The shame, the guilt, and finally, the desperate need for forgiveness overwhelmed her proud heart. The chapel's silence held her grief as she knelt there, mascara running down her cheeks, her carefully maintained facade crumbling in the face of true grace and courage she'd witnessed between Jack and Ellie. The candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, as Ruth Ann Blevins began her own journey back to compassion. The old wooden doors of Willow Creek First Baptist Church creaked open as people filed in, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Morning light streamed through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across worn wooden pews. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Ruth Ann Blevins stood at the podium, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled, her hands trembling as they gripped the smooth wood. She'd called this meeting herself, and now faced nearly 200 townspeople, the largest gathering anyone could remember since last Christmas. "I've done something terrible," she began, her voice cracking. The microphone squealed slightly, making several people wince. "For weeks now, I've been spreading lies about two of the finest people in our community." The church fell silent. Even the children, who usually squirmed during Sunday service, sat still. Near the back, Jack Turner sat in a wheelchair. His daughter Lily perched protectively beside him. His arms and chest were still wrapped in bandages, visible beneath his button-down shirt. His face showed the strain of being out of the hospital so soon, but his eyes remained steady, focused on Ruth Ann. "I let jealousy poison my heart," Ruth Ann continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I watched Eleanor Jameson and Jack Turner show this town what real Christian kindness looks like, and instead of joining them, I tried to tear them down." Ellie sat 3 rows from the front, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her face remained gentle, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I spread rumors about their friendship. I questioned their intentions. Ruth Ann's voice broke completely. She gripped the podium harder. "I helped destroy something beautiful, not just their reputations, but the veteran shelter too. Those men lost their home because of the hatred I helped create. A soft murmur rippled through the congregation. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing their own role in spreading the gossip. "I'm asking for forgiveness," Ruth Ann said, looking directly at Jack and Ellie. "Not just from you two, but from everyone here. And I'm asking for help to make this right." She pulled out a piece of paper from her purse, unfolding it with shaking hands. "I've already spoken to the bank. I'm donating half my savings, $25,000, to rebuild the shelter. But it's not enough. We need to come together as a community." Mayor Thompson stood up from his seat in the front row. "The town council will match Ruth Ann's donation," he announced, "and we'll fast-track all the building permits needed." Like dominoes falling, others began standing up too. "I can donate lumber from my supply store," called out Bob Wheeler. "My construction crew will volunteer labor," added Mike Davidson. "The Ladies' Auxiliary will organize fundraising dinners," declared Martha Jenkins. Each offer brought more tears to Ruth Ann's eyes. She stepped away from the podium, making her way down the aisle toward Jack and Ellie. The click of her heels echoed in the sudden quiet. She stopped first in front of Jack's wheelchair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You nearly died because of what I started." Jack reached out and took her hand, his grip firm despite his weakness. "We all make mistakes, Ruth Ann," he said quietly. "It's what we do to fix them that matters." She turned to Ellie next, but before she could speak, Ellie had already risen and pulled her into a tight embrace. The two women held each other, decades of small-town rivalry dissolving in tears and forgiveness. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat from the pulpit. "Miss Jameson," he called out, "would you share a few words with us?" Ellie released Ruth Ann and made her way to the front. She didn't need the podium. Her years of teaching had given her a voice that could carry to the back of any room. "You know," she began, looking out at the familiar faces, "I've lived in Willow Creek my whole life. I taught most of you, or your children. And lately, I'd started to believe that our town had lost its heart." She paused, her eyes finding Jack and Lily in the back. "But then a single-dad veteran stood up for me one day at the grocery store. He showed me that compassion isn't a feeling. It's a choice we make, every single day. Each time we choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over judgment, forgiveness over bitterness. We help heal not just others, but ourselves too." Several people nodded, dabbing at their eyes with tissues or handkerchiefs. "Look around this room," Ellie continued. "Look at how many of you just offered to help rebuild the shelter. That's what community means. That's what love looks like in action." She smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "And that's why I know, without a doubt, that Willow Creek's heart is beating stronger than ever." The applause started slowly, a few claps here and there, but quickly grew into a thunderous standing ovation that filled every corner of the old church. People were hugging, crying, laughing together. Even the teenagers, who usually hung back, were on their feet, cheering. Ruth Ann joined Jack and Lily in the back, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Together they watched as their neighbors and friends surrounded Ellie at the front, each one wanting to shake her hand or offer a hug. The morning sunlight streamed stronger through the stained glass now, bathing the congregation in warm, multicolored light. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like more than just a collection of houses and stores. It felt like home. The late summer sun beat down on the construction site where the veteran shelter once stood. Jack Turner sat in a weathered folding chair, his burns still healing under long sleeves, but his eyes were bright as he watched the bustling activity before him. A clipboard rested on his lap while he directed volunteers with gentle authority. "Those support beams need to go a little more to the left," he called out, his voice carrying across the lot. "That's it! Perfect!" Ellie Jameson moved through the crowd of volunteers like a conductor leading an orchestra. Her silver hair was tied back with a bandana, and despite the heat, she maintained her characteristic grace. "Water break in 10 minutes, everyone," she announced, earning grateful nods from the workers. The transformation of the site was remarkable. Where charred ruins had stood just weeks ago, the skeleton of a new building rose proudly. Local businesses had outdone themselves. Thompson's Hardware donated lumber and tools, Miller's paint shop provided all the paint they needed, and even Old Mister, Peterson from the diner kept everyone fed with regular deliveries of sandwiches and sweet tea. "Miss Ellie," Lily's voice rang out from behind the building. "Come see what we're doing." Ellie made her way around the corner to find a group of teenagers working on a mural. Lily stood in the center, her hands and clothes splattered with paint, beaming with pride. The teens had sketched out an enormous heart on the wall, but instead of solid color, it was composed of dozens of overlapping handprints in various sizes and shades. "It's a heart made of helping hands," Lily explained, her eyes sparkling. "Because that's what brought everyone together." Ellie's eyes misted over as she watched more volunteers add their handprints to the design. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Absolutely beautiful." Under a large white tent nearby, Ellie's literacy class had resumed. 6 veterans sat at folding tables, working through their lessons with determined concentration. The familiar routine had survived the fire, a testament to resilience that went beyond mere buildings. "Hey, Mr. Turner," called out Tommy Jenkins, a local high school quarterback who'd been helping all week. "Where do you want these windows?" Jack consulted his clipboard, stacked them carefully by the east wall. "We'll start installing them tomorrow." He shifted in his chair, wincing slightly at the movement, but his smile never wavered. The sound of his laughter surprised everyone when Billy Matthews, one of the younger volunteers, accidentally painted himself into a corner and had to do an awkward dance to get out. It was a warm, genuine sound that had been missing for too long. "Daddy's laughing more," Lily whispered to Ellie as they sorted through paint supplies. "He used to only smile a little bit, but now he really laughs." Ellie squeezed the girl's shoulder. Sometimes people just need a reminder that they're not alone. Throughout the afternoon, more townspeople arrived with donations: curtains, furniture, books for the library corner. Ruth Ann brought a box of brand new bedding sets, her eyes still carrying a hint of shame but also determination to make things right. The construction site became a hub of community activity. Teenagers taught elderly volunteers how to use power tools, while veterans shared stories with curious listeners. Children ran errands, carrying messages and water bottles to tired workers. Even those who couldn't lift or build found ways to help, sorting supplies, organizing schedules, or simply offering encouragement. As the day wore on, the golden light of late afternoon painted everything in warm hues. The mural dried slowly in the fading sun, each handprint a testament to change. Ellie's literacy students packed up their books, their progress marked not just in reading skills, but in the way they held their heads higher, spoke more confidently. The volunteers began cleaning up for the day, storing tools and securing tarps over unfinished areas. Jack remained in his chair, making notes and checking off items on his list. His face showed fatigue, but also satisfaction, maybe attained. The kind that comes from watching something good take shape under your hands. As twilight settled over the site, most people had headed home. The air grew cooler, carrying the first hints of evening. Ellie walked over to where Jack sat, still reviewing his plans. She held out a thermos of coffee, steam rising in the growing dusk. "You look alive again," she said softly, watching his face in the fading light. Jack took the thermos, his eyes crinkling at the corners. As he grinned, "Guess I finally am." The morning dew sparkled like tiny diamonds on the fresh-painted boards of the shelter's new porch. Jack Turner eased himself into one of the rocking chairs, his healing burns still tender beneath his flannel shirt. Beside him, Ellie Jameson settled into the matching rocker, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the early morning chill. The sun hadn't quite crested the horizon, painting the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold. Inside the shelter, the soft sounds of early risers, getting ready for the day, filtered through the screen door. "Can't believe how far we've come," Jack said softly, his calloused hands resting on the chair's worn arms. The porch boards beneath their feet still carried the fresh scent of cedar. Ellie hummed in agreement, her silver hair catching the first rays of sunlight. "Remember when we started? All that charred wood and broken glass? Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once." Jack's voice carried a weight of memory. He watched a cardinal land on the new bird feeder Lily had helped hang last week. The silence between them felt comfortable. filled with the gentle creaking of their chairs and the morning chorus of birdsong. A cool breeze carried the scent of brewing coffee from inside. Sarah would have loved this place, Jack said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened on the armrest. She always wanted to help people, always knew the right thing to say. Ellie turned to look at him, her eyes gentle with understanding. The morning light softened the lines around her eyes, carved by years of both joy and sorrow. I've been. Jack paused, struggling with words that had been locked away for so long. I've been afraid to care too much about anyone since she died. Even Lily sometimes. Though God knows I love that girl more than life itself. He swallowed hard. It's like there's this wall I built, brick by brick, day by day. The sun peeked over the horizon, now casting long shadows across the porch. A door squeaked inside the shelter, followed by quiet footsteps and murmured good mornings. After Sarah. Jack's voice cracked slightly. After we lost her, it felt like caring about anyone else would somehow. I don't know. Like it would make what we had mean less, somehow. He shook his head. Sounds foolish saying it out loud. Ellie leaned forward in her chair, her eyes filled with warmth. It's not foolish, Jack. Not at all. She waited a moment before continuing. You know, when I retired from teaching, I thought I'd never find that same kind of purpose again. Thought loving my students had used up all the love I had to give. Jack turned to look at her, really look at her, as the morning light cast a warm glow across the porch. But love doesn't replace what we've lost, Ellie said gently, her voice carrying years of wisdom. It honors it. Every time you show kindness to someone, every veteran you help here, that's Sarah's love living on through you. Jack's breath caught in his throat. A tear slipped down his cheek, but he didn't brush it away. The wall you built, Ellie continued softly, maybe it wasn't to keep love out. Maybe it was to keep Sarah's memory safe. But Jack, memories don't need walls. They need open spaces to breathe, to grow, to touch other lives. Without thinking, Jack reached over and took Ellie's hand. Her fingers were warm and steady against his, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. The sun climbed higher, warming the wooden boards beneath their feet. Inside the shelter, someone laughed, a bright, clear sound that floated through the morning air. The smell of coffee grew stronger, and footsteps moved back and forth as the shelter's residents began their day. Maybe caring really does fix people, Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He squeezed Ellie's hand gently, feeling the morning sun warm on his face. The autumn sun bathed Willow Creek in golden light as townspeople gathered on the freshly laid lawn in front of the rebuilt veterans' shelter. White folding chairs dotted the grass, filled with faces both familiar and new. The building stood proud and tall, its fresh paint gleaming, with a large American flag draped across the front entrance. Jack Turner adjusted his tie nervously behind the makeshift podium. His burns had mostly healed, leaving only faint scars on his forearms, badges of courage, Lily called them. He caught sight of his daughter in the front row, wearing her Sunday best, her small hands clutching the sheet music she'd been practicing for weeks. Ellie sat beside Lily, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She'd traded her usual casual attire for a powder blue dress that made her look younger somehow, more vibrant. When their eyes met, she gave him an encouraging nod. Mayor Thompson stepped up first, making a brief introduction about community spirit and second chances. Jack barely heard the words, his mind drifting to that first day at the grocery store when a simple act of kindness had changed everything. Then it was his turn. Jack gripped the podium edges, his hands steady despite his racing heart. The microphone squealed briefly before settling into silence. He cleared his throat. When I came home from Iraq, he began, his voice low but clear, I thought I'd left all my battles behind. But sometimes the hardest fights are the ones we face right here at home. The fight against loneliness, against giving up, against losing faith in humanity. A gentle breeze rustled through the crowd. In the back, several veterans stood at attention, their faces solemn and understanding. I lost my wife Sarah 5 years ago, Jack continued, his voice catching slightly. And for a long time, I thought caring about anything or anyone was just asking for more pain. Then, I met someone who taught me different. He turned toward Ellie, whose cheeks flushed pink. Miss Eleanor Jameson didn't just stand up for one homeless veteran that day in the grocery store. She stood up for something bigger. The idea that kindness matters, even when it costs us something. Maybe especially then. Ruth Ann Blevins dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, her usual perfectly composed appearance softened by emotion. This shelter isn't just about giving veterans a place to sleep, Jack said, gesturing to the building behind him. It's about showing everyone that they matter, that someone cares. That's what Ellie taught us all. The crowd murmured in agreement. Several heads nodded. In the military, we talk about heroes. Jack's voice grew stronger. But sometimes the biggest heroes are the ones who fight the everyday battles. The battle to stay kind in an unkind world. To keep believing when it's easier to give up. To stand up when everyone else sits down. He paused, swallowing hard. That's why we're dedicating this shelter today, not just to our veterans, but to everyone who chooses to care when it's hardest. Because that's what real courage looks like. Mayor Thompson stepped forward, pulling away the cloth covering a bronze plaque near the entrance. The words gleamed in the sunlight. Dedicated to those who care when it's hardest. Applause rippled through the crowd. Jack stepped back, and Ruth Ann approached the podium next, her hands trembling slightly. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice wavering. Then she turned away from the microphone and walked straight to Ellie. The crowd fell silent as Ruth Ann knelt beside Ellie's chair. "I was wrong," Ruth Ann said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "I was so wrong about you, about everything. You showed us what real Christian love looks like, while I just talked about it." Tears streamed down her face as she hugged Ellie tightly. "Thank you for forgiving me." Ellie returned the embrace, her own tears falling freely now. "There's nothing to forgive," she whispered. "We all lose our way sometimes." The moment hung in the air, tender and real, until Lily stood up, smoothing her dress. She walked to the center of the makeshift stage, clutching her sheet music. The piano teacher from the elementary school began playing soft chords on the borrowed keyboard. Lily's clear, young voice filled the autumn air with the song she'd written. One act of kindness. The simple melody carried words of hope and healing, of small gestures that change lives, of love that builds bridges between hearts. One act of kindness lights up the dark. One gentle word can heal a heart. We're never too lost to start again. When someone shows us how to care. By the final chorus, many in the crowd were wiping away tears. Veterans stood straighter, townspeople reached for each other's hands, and something profound and healing seemed to settle over Willow Creek like a warm blanket. As the last note faded, the applause was thunderous. Lily beamed, taking a small bow before running to hug her father. Jack lifted her up, holding her close, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. He looked over at Ellie, who was still sitting in her chair, smiling through her tears. Moving carefully, mindful of his healing injuries, he walked over to her. "You saved more than a shelter," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved a town." The applause continued around them, a soundtrack to a moment neither would ever forget. Golden rays of sunset painted long shadows across Willow Creek's maple-lined streets as Eleanor Jameson stepped out of the veteran shelter. The bronze autumn light caught the dust motes dancing in the doorway behind her, and she took a moment to breathe in the peaceful silence that followed a day well spent. Her worn leather bag hung heavy on her shoulder, filled with the day's reading materials and handwritten thank you notes from her students. Precious scraps of paper covered in shaky handwriting that spoke of gratitude and hope restored. The evening air carried the sweet scent of autumn leaves, mingling with the fresh paint that still lingered around the rebuilt shelter. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the gentle hum of life, returning to normal, doors closing, cars starting, the soft murmur of families gathering for dinner. The very sounds that had once made her feel so terribly alone now wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She paused to lock the door, her fingers brushing against the new brass nameplate that read, Eleanor Jameson, Literary Program Director. The metal was cool beneath her touch, still bright and unmarked by time. A smile tugged at her lips as she remembered how far they'd come from those first uncertain days of teaching under a makeshift tent, when she'd wondered if anyone would even show up to listen to an old woman read stories. Miss Ellie, wait up. Lily's voice rang clear through the quiet street, cutting through the evening stillness like a bell. Ellie turned to see Lily Turner bouncing down the sidewalk, her dark braids swinging with each exuberant step. The girl's face was flushed with the kind of joy that only children could carry so effortlessly, her eyes bright with the last golden light of day. Behind her, Jack followed at his characteristic steady pace, carrying a wicker basket overflowing with fresh-cut flowers from the shelter's new garden. His sleeves were rolled up despite the evening chill, revealing the fading scars on his forearms, those jagged reminders of courage from that terrible night months ago when he'd run into burning flames to save lives. Well, what a lovely surprise, Ellie said, her eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. I thought you two had headed home hours ago. Daddy wanted to pick flowers for the veterans' rooms tomorrow, Lily explained breathlessly, falling into step beside her with the easy familiarity of a granddaughter. And I wanted to make sure we didn't forget your porch bouquet. We promised, remember? Jack caught up to them, his quiet presence as steady and comforting as always. There was something different about him now, a lightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there in those early days when grief had weighed him down like stones in his pockets. Can't let our favorite teacher walk home alone, he said with a gentle smile that reached his eyes. They walked together down Cedar Street, their footsteps creating a rhythm against the cracked sidewalk. The grocery store loomed ahead, that familiar building where it had all begun on a day that felt like a lifetime ago. The parking lot was nearly empty now, just a few scattered cars belonging to the evening shift workers. The automatic doors slid open and closed occasionally as late shoppers hurried in for forgotten items, their faces tired but peaceful in the fading light. The evening air was alive with the sound of crickets beginning their nightly symphony, and fireflies had begun their magical dance among the ancient oak trees that lined the street. Lily skipped ahead of them, her sneakers slapping against the pavement as she chased the tiny glowing creatures, catching lightning bugs in her cupped hands before releasing them with delighted giggles that echoed off the quiet houses. Remember when we first met right there? Jack nodded toward the store's glass entrance, where fluorescent light spilled out onto the pavement. You were standing up to those bullies, even though you were shaking like a leaf. Ellie felt her cheeks warm at the memory. I remember feeling so alone, she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Like I was the very last person in this entire town who still believed in kindness. Like maybe I was just a foolish old woman holding on to something that had died years ago. You weren't alone, Jack said, his voice firm with conviction. You just showed the rest of us how to be brave again, how to remember what we'd forgotten. They turned onto Maple Drive, where Ellie's small white house sat, nestled between towering maple trees that had begun their autumn transformation. Her white picket fence stood pristine in the fading light, no longer bearing the cruel words that had once been spray-painted across its surface. The painted flowers that Lily had carefully added along the bottom edge months ago had inspired a neighborhood trend. Now similar decorative touches adorned fences all through the area, creating a tapestry of color and hope that stretched down every street. Mrs. Henderson from next door was watering her chrysanthemums, and she waved cheerfully as they passed. Evening, Ellie. Beautiful day at the shelter today, I heard. The best kind, Ellie called back, marveling at how different things were now. There had been a time when her neighbors barely acknowledged her existence. As they reached her porch, the very same spot where Jack had first walked her home on that uncertain evening months ago, Lily ran up the wooden steps and spun around, her arms spread wide. Can we arrange the flowers with you, Miss Ellie? Please? I picked out the prettiest ones just for you. Of course, sweetheart. Ellie set her heavy bag down beside the door and settled into one of the wooden rocking chairs that Jack had repaired for her after the vandalism. The chair creaked softly under her weight, a comforting sound that spoke of home and belonging. Jack placed the overflowing basket on the small table between them and began sorting through the blooms with careful hands, cheerful daisies with bright yellow centers, vibrant black-eyed Susans that seemed to glow in the twilight, and late-blooming zinnias from the shelter's garden in shades of pink and orange. Each flower had been chosen with care, picked by veterans who took pride in their small garden plot behind the shelter. "You know," Jack said quietly, handing Lily a perfect daisy to add to the arrangement they were creating. "I need to thank you, Ellie. Really thank you." "Thank me? Whatever for?" Ellie asked, genuinely puzzled. If anything, she felt like she should be thanking him for everything he'd given her: purpose, friendship, a reason to believe again, for showing me that compassion still exists in this world. After Sarah died, I'd closed myself off completely. Built walls so high I couldn't see over them anymore. He paused, watching Lily arrange flowers with the serious concentration that children brought to important tasks. I thought it was safer that way. Thought if I didn't care, I couldn't get hurt again. But you reminded me that caring for others isn't weakness. It's the strongest, most courageous thing we can do. Lily finished her arrangement, stepping back to admire her handiwork before wrapping her small arms around Ellie in a tight hug that smelled of sunshine and childhood innocence. "Thank you for making Daddy smile again," she whispered against Ellie's shoulder. "He was so sad for so long, but now he laughs when I tell jokes." Ellie held the girl close, her heart full to bursting with a happiness she'd thought was lost forever. She looked out at her street, at the neighbors walking dogs and chatting on porches, at the warmth and genuine connection that had replaced the cold indifference of before. A group of veterans from the shelter waved as they passed by, heading to their weekly dinner at Murphy's Diner, where Sal always saved them the best table by the window. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze, rich and real. Ruth Ann's blue sedan slowed as she drove past, and she rolled down her window to call out a cheerful greeting. "Beautiful evening, isn't it? See you at church Sunday, Ellie." The transformation in Ruth Ann still amazed Ellie sometimes. The woman who had once spread vicious rumors now organized charity drives and volunteered at the shelter's kitchen every Tuesday. People could change, Ellie had learned. Hearts could soften. Grace could reach even the most hardened souls. "People do care, after all," Ellie whispered, her eyes misting over with tears of joy and gratitude. The trio stood together on the porch for a long moment, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that reflected off the windows of houses throughout the neighborhood. The air was growing cooler now, carrying the promise of winter, but still holding on to autumn's gentle warmth. Jack gathered the empty basket, checking to make sure they hadn't dropped any flowers, and they began their leisurely walk toward his house, 3 blocks away. Their footsteps echoed softly on the sidewalk as golden streetlights flickered to life overhead, one by one, creating pools of warm light that stretched before them like a path to somewhere beautiful. The old lampposts had been restored as part of the town's renewal project, their vintage charm adding character to streets that had once felt forgotten. Lily's laughter rang out as she chased another firefly, the sound mixing with the gentle chorus of crickets and the distant sound of children being called in for baths and bedtime stories. Jack and Ellie followed at a comfortable pace, sharing the easy silence of true friends who didn't need words to communicate their contentment. The town around them felt different now, healed and whole, bound together by threads of love and courage that had always been there, waiting beneath the surface to be rediscovered. As they reached the corner where Jack would turn toward his own street, he paused and looked back at the path they'd traveled. "You know what the real miracle is?" he said softly. "What's that?" Ellie asked. "We didn't change the town. We just reminded it of what it already was." And as they said their goodnights and went their separate ways, Ellie carried those words with her like a blessing. She had once believed the worst, that kindness had died, that no one cared anymore. But one man had stood up for her when she needed it most, and in doing so he had reminded an entire community that caring never truly dies. It just sometimes needs someone brave enough to bring it back to life. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.